Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. After a little pause of, I think, several weeks, Bob, isn't it already? Um,
Yeah.
so the circular strategies are widely discussed, and you know it by now. I mean, Bob, as well as myself, we are absolute fans and supporters of circular strategies, and but what often remains unclear is what actually works once we move beyond ambition and into real customer behavior, product design, and business logic. So, Bob and I, we are absolutely delighted and thrilled to welcome Anne Raudaskoski. No, Raudaskoski, I'm sorry, to this webinar. We call each other always with our first name, so I'm very sorry, Anne. And Anne is the founder of the Regeneration Unlimited and also the author of Circular Strategies for Success. She has been working in the circular economy and circular design since 2013 and has advised businesses, ministries, industry bodies, municipalities, and universities across multiple countries. And before we dive into the questions, a quick word on how we will run the session. So, Bob and I will lead the discussion with Anne through a few guiding questions to just to set the scene. While we talk, you're invited to share your thoughts and questions in the chat, and we'll turn to them into the second half of our conversation. So, Anne, to get us started and to set the tone for today's session, can you briefly introduce yourself and share what led you to found Ethica? I think it was in 2013, and what continues to drive your work today.
Yes. So first of all, Bob and Catherine, it's lovely to be your guest. So thank you for the invitation. So I often use the title circular economy strategist. That perhaps describes the best what I do, and I'm a generalist, so I worked across different sectors, not just between like private and public, but also from, let's say, chemicals to construction to textiles to electronics. So you asked me about Ethica, which is my previous company that I co-founded in 2013. And if any of you can remember what you were doing in 2013, because I think that circular economy was not something that people addressed every day. But why I wanted to set up Ethica at the time, and it was Finland's first, it still is Finland's first circular economy consultancy, was that I had been working in the field of sustainability before. And when I learned about circular economy, I realized that it can address those weak points that kind of sustainability as a framework and toolbox had. And I was really intrigued, especially by the kind of, it talked about the business models, but also how to redesign. So the power of design was very kind of present and prevalent. And of course, then I started developing the circular design framework a few years after that in 2016. So to me, it was kind of like an obvious choice to start working in the field of circularity. Whoever knows me knows that I'm extremely passionate about it. So if nothing, it's only increased over the years, and I've been fortunate enough to work with a variety of clients in different countries. So, for example, now through my, as you mentioned, Catherine, Regeneration Unlimited, my own one-woman show, I currently work with the government of Navarra here in Spain. And I also work on a European project which relates to kind of circular design. And then I also work with the aviation sector. So I have very different clients. I'm also a member of the board. I do a lot of keynotes. So it's kind of a puzzle of different things. And I just can't imagine any better way to spend my days than doing exactly what I'm doing.
Great. And Anna, you used the word design, and then I'm thinking really a lot about also the customer, that's the product, but also how you design something really for the end user, the customer. And we know that a lot of circular initiatives fail. So what I'm actually wondering is, why do circular initiatives basically fail from a customer experience perspective?
I really like that question because if we very quickly go back to that 2013, like more than 10 years ago, at the time, and I think anyone working in the field was very much focused on, we talked a lot about let's close the loops and how do we close the loops, and what do we need to redesign in the kind of operations and strategies. And with hindsight, I call it very technocentric approach and development. We didn't talk about customer experience. We talk about circular product design strategies and the kind of system level changes that are required. So to answer your question, the customer wasn't addressed. It wasn't in the mindset. Mm-hmm. And of course, that leads to creating solutions which don't necessarily offer the best customer experience. And of course, we as customers are looking for solutions that make our lives easier, right? Not harder, no matter how circular, how beautifully circular or sustainable they would be. We want solutions and products that function, do their job, and do it in a way that makes our life easier. So I think that's the kind of number one, that there hasn't been much thought given to the customer perspective. And I can give you a couple of examples. This is from my personal experience. A couple of years ago, I needed to get a new laptop. And I had heard that the service provider provides also laptops as a service. And I thought that, of course, I would opt for that. Yeah. But when talking on the phone with the salesperson, it was very obvious that, he didn't want to sell me the laptop as a service. He said that, if you want to buy the laptop in a traditional way, purchase it, we'll get it to your doorstep in less than 24 hours. But yes, we have this laptop as a service, but, it requires a level of paperwork, and in about a couple of weeks, you'll get your laptop. And of course, it is obvious I could not do anything without laptop for 2 weeks. So I had to choose the traditional way of buying. Lots of time there's a lack of branding. The customer journey hasn't been thought through. But I think it always goes back to kind of the very foundation of the fact that many times it's changing. Luckily, it's changing. But in many cases, the focus is much more on processes and systems or the product design itself rather than the customer. So not really thinking that, hang on, taking a deep breath and thinking that how can we best serve our clients in a circular way? And I think that should be the key question even before the product design starts. I think you are muted.
You're on mute, Catherine.
Thank you. This is such a beautiful transition to the next question I'm having is, where do companies misread customer behavior in circular models? Because this is where often there is, I mean, the mismatch appears, on stage, right?
Yeah. So in my book, I also list these kind of common pitfalls and kind of the lack of thinking of customer and customer experience. But one thing that is clear is that many times circular pilots, circular concepts might have been initiated by the sustainability department, in which case there might be companies' circularity goals that they want to reach. There might be idea that, we have these early adapters, people who are really into anything and everything sustainable, that we will address those. But that's not the kind of big mass. So if the kind of initiative starts from the sustainability department and marketing department, or let's say that there would be, I don't know, people who have knowledge about behavioral economics and design customer journeys, they should definitely be involved. The other thing, what happens when there's no thinking or when there's no focus on the customer experience is, do you know the kind of system 1 and system 2 kind of brain, how our brain functions? So we have this system 1 and system 2. So basically what's been researched is that system 1 is this more emotional, it's suited for rapid decision making. And system 2 of our brain capacity is more rational. It's perfectly suited for complex problem solving. And what this means, and why I'm talking about system 1 and system 2, is that when we buy anything, most of the time we use this system 1. According to research, it's around 96%. So basically, all of our buying decisions are made through system 1, which also means that we buy based on our emotions. So if company only highlights that, you'll get lower carbon footprint and this is more sustainable, it talks to the system 2, which is very rarely used when buying something. So I think this type of information would be very useful when designing circular concepts, products or product service offerings, because essentially we're asking people to change something in their behavior. So instead of that one traditional one-off purchase, we're asking them maybe to rent or lease or subscribe to the product. And that requires changes in their behavior. But marketing professionals have been very, very clever in creating solutions that attract system 1, but those are all linear solutions. So they've been sort of skilling these, how to attract customers and how to talk to system 1 for decades. But so what I'm saying, and what is good news, is that those tools and understanding and research already exist, but it needs to be translated and brought into the circular context and start from there. And also there's, in my book, I talk about not pushing, but easing customers to circular behavior. This is not my own sentence, but I actually, when I was writing the book, I read a book by Anne, who's a behavioral scientist or designer. And she talks a lot about that, we should ease people into the desired behavior, rather than thinking that, okay, but they should be more interested in sustainability. Well, they should be into circularity. But if they are not, then it's up to us as companies to take it as a design challenge. Okay, how do we solve this problem? How do we make our circular offering so super attractive and desirable that people automatically, it talks to their system one, and they automatically want to choose that rather than the linear product.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? Because this is so, I just love that discussion. Thank you so much, Anne. Is that the reason why so many incumbents have or keep circular projects at, or consider it more as a pilot project? You know, because it often you have basically everywhere you have circular initiatives running, but they don't scale it, right?
Yeah. You're very right in that. They too rarely they scale up. I think this, from my perspective, is definitely the kind of at the core of the challenge, that not thinking sufficiently about the customer experience. But I'd also say that the second problem might be that if it's designed as a pilot, but there's no growth strategy beyond the pilot, so like, where do you go with that pilot, even if it were successful? So I think that although, and I totally recommend running pilots to kind of test and learn from piloting, but at the same time, you should already be, if you are serious about going circular, and then it's of course up to the management team of the company that, hey, this is part of our kind of a nuclear strategy, and we need to have a growth strategy, that how do we efficiently grow and scale it from the pilot. And many times, I think that that's the kind of another piece that is missing.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it already, Anna, but you were also referring to systems one and systems two thinking and basically behavior. And you see that the example you put forward with the laptop buying yourself is that also behavior is maybe appealing to values, but you also noticed, okay, the change in the behavior is really if the rules make it easy, profitable, or normal. And what you see currently is also with the example you put forward, there is going to be a change in ownership versus usage. That's basically separated from each other. And a lot of leaders still have issues to actually understand it. So what is really required for them to rethink value and value creation?
Let me start from the big picture. I recently went to Brussels to the Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform Conference. It's an annual conference. And it's really, really interesting how the narrative has changed. Because when thinking about the first Circular Economy Action Plan of the European Union in 2015, it already talked about competitiveness. But for the majority of decision makers and policymakers, it was still sidelined as an environmental initiative. Although we as circularity people, we tried very hard to talk about, how this enables companies operate within planetary boundaries and how it secures companies' competitiveness. So that was in 2015 and beyond. But what was really interesting in this conference a couple of weeks ago was that everybody talked about strategic autonomy. Everybody talked about security. Everybody talked about securing the feedstock for the forthcoming Circular Economy Act, which aims to create secondary raw materials market in Europe. Everybody talked about competitiveness, securing the very foundation of business. And yes, they talk about lesser environmental impact, but that was only after these other attributes. So the order has changed, which is really good. I mean, yes, it would have been wonderful if the argument for the environment would have been strong enough across kind of a political parties, but it wasn't. But now the majority of politicians have realized that actually this is very much about strategic autonomy. So I think we come back to your question about value creation, that companies are starting to realize that actually there's a huge amount of value embedded in our materials, our raw materials that we extract and we buy them. According to the EU, companies use around 40% of their budgets for raw materials. That's a substantial figure, which could be decreased through circular actions and operations. So understanding that there's a lot of value embedded in our materials, in our products. So actually, maybe it doesn't make sense to just sell them and lose sight of them. Like, what happens after we've sold it? We have no idea. But if we were to build systems that we know what happens to the product, we know what happens after the use phase, and we build a reverse logistics system to get it back and reuse those valuable materials, that would offer us a different perspective and different way of conducting business. And I think the kind of value creation relates, in my head, it relates mostly to that, because I run circular design programs for the past 10 years, and I've trained around 700 professionals over the years. And it's really interesting. I always start from the big picture, and I talk about the fact that planet is a closed system. And surprisingly, one might think that, yeah, it's a no-brainer, but surprisingly often the feedback that I've gotten from the R&D directors and designers is that it just, hit me at your workshop that indeed it is a closed system. So it's not like a massive pipe that raw materials just appear from somewhere. Yeah, there's no endless funnel providing us with virgin raw materials. And I think that tells me that we, many times, we're so focused on business operations and details of the product, which of course is required, but forgetting the bigger picture, that actually, indeed, we live in a closed system and we won't get new materials. Now I'm talking about non-renewables, but we also have challenges with renewable materials. So the kind of value creation there, but just very briefly, before moving on, I would like to mention a very different type of realization regarding the value creation. And I think that goes to how to move from transactions to creating relationships with your customers. And that was also, I interviewed over 20 companies and experts for my book. And for example, Houdini, which is a Swedish outdoor brand, and they've taken seriously circularity very seriously, and they've changed their business model. They also run these not just sustainability or circularity assessment, but actually they developed a planetary boundaries assessment. So how do we operate within planetary boundaries, and where do we lack, where do we need to improve to better operate within planetary boundaries? But they talked a lot about creating long-lasting customer relationships, rather than focusing on, okay, how do we execute this transaction in a very efficient way? And I think that's another kind of I would say very important shift in companies' mindset and understanding the value of it.
It is You basically, what you just said is confirming also the research I'm doing. It is, for me, it is about, the value creation. And I became aware of that through Matsukato's work around the value, and where I was confronted for the first time that we call often value creation when it is value extraction. And in the work that I'm doing is that I'm talking about the value preservation or the asset preservation. Because if as a company, if I bought already the material, why letting it go? Why? I mean, if possible, for sure. And why not bring it back? Because as you translated it so beautifully, it allows you to also recreate and rejuvenate your relationship with your clients, with your customers, and the loyalty that we have often, and the trust also that we have lost with all the digitization of the world, the pure transactional aspects. So thank you. I mean, so my next question is, because I'm a huge fan of regeneration, where does regeneration truly strengthen? And let me show that question. Circular product design, and where does it become unclear?
This is a big question. It's a good question, but it's also a very big question. We start with some, let's say, fundamentals. So from a personal perspective, circular product design should always aim for regeneration. It's not easy, but I would encourage R&D teams to take it as a design challenge. So that's kind of one pillar, always seeking the potential for regeneration. Then the other pillar is local environment, local ecosystems, local circumstances. So what might be a regenerative solution in Spain may not be regenerative in Peru, for instance. So that's the kind of second pillar. And then the third pillar, when talking about regeneration, is the value chain approach. Now, I know, Catherine, that you asked about circular product design specifically, but I think addressing it from the value chain approach or perspective is important, because and what I always say to my clients, that this is not a question of yes or no, that is or can company become regenerative. It's far more kind of a granular question, in the sense that what makes sense is to break down your operations and use that value chain approach and explore each stage from the regeneration perspective. What are the opportunities here to regenerate? So there might be kind of hidden gems there, where to start, rather than think that, okay, the challenge of regeneration is totally impossible for us. So I would, on one hand, highlight the importance of design intent. So always, whatever the product, always seeking that is there potential, maybe not today, but in the long run, is there a potential for regeneration? Can we, it might be about maturity of technologies or availability of raw materials. It might be any question, but seeking the potential. I think that is something that every R&D team should do. And then there's, of course, the question of whether we are talking about biological cycle or technical cycle. So in other words, biological cycle referring to renewable materials, and technical cycle referring to non-renewable materials. So if we say, for instance, one of the companies that I interviewed for my book was Philips, and they mainly operate in technical cycles. So they need a lot of metals and critical raw materials in their products. And of course, there's a constant R&D going on regarding if there are some bio-based innovations that they could start using in the future. But generally speaking, at this point in time in history, it's easier for companies operating in biological cycle, in other words, who use renewable materials. So I'll give you an example. The other company that I interviewed for my book was Emma Lewisham, which is a New Zealand cosmetics company. They provide a lot of information on their website about their circularity plans and targets and strategy. And one of the key pillars in their strategy is that they supply from farmers who use regenerative practices. So it instantly creates a requirement and supports farmers who want to apply regenerative farming practices. Now, whether the product itself, with all transport, packaging materials, although they have a collection system for their packaging, I wouldn't call the product itself regenerative, but they created already regeneration through their supply chain requirements. And this is something that any company also working in a technical cycle could do. I'll give you another example. One Finnish company, very advanced in their kind of sustainability and circularity plans, also wanted to address the topic of regeneration. So they started exploring how to be regenerative when building their new factory. And obviously, when you start building a new factory, you need to start from the local environment, which was one of the pillars that I just mentioned. So what's happening there? What's the flora and fauna? Is there a way that we could support the water circulation system that naturally goes there, the insect population, the plants that naturally grows there? How do we build in such a way that would support these systems? And I think that's a very interesting design challenge to any company. So that's why I would like to broaden the idea of regeneration and really carefully explore each value chain stage that, okay, there's an opportunity for us changing raw materials. Another example would be Origin by Ocean. It's a Finnish scale-up company. They remove harmful algae from oceans and use it as raw material to high-end applications, to cosmetics, detergents. So they're cleaning basically oceans while offering a perfect alternative raw material for these applications. So hence my kind of zooming out regarding your question.
Can I ask a very brief question? Some companies are promoting and applying bioeconomy. Is that the first step towards regeneration?
Not necessarily. I mean, bioeconomy is not necessarily regenerative. It can be very kind of efficient-based, linear thinking economy. So bioeconomy also needs to apply and make sure that it applies circularity and regenerative principles.
So we just talked a lot about design, and not just product design, also basically value design again, Anna, and the words which we just used, bioeconomy, feels like a bit like a marketing term. So we also think, if you think about before that, yeah, everything you want to include in your product, in your whole process, you have to be efficient. No doubt, you already touched upon it previously also. But what basically defines competitive advantage then, if you think about the whole circular context, instead of just marketing terms? What really makes the difference?
I'd really like to go back to the Brussels conference, because it actually, when you transition to circular way of operating, you're securing the very foundation of your business. You are less dependent on virgin raw material supply chains, less dependent, or you're less vulnerable for market volatility, price competition. I mean, the pandemic was an awful but also very clear example of how vulnerable global linear supply chains are. So I think that there's a kind of bigger question there to understand that, okay, how do we decrease our dependency? And it also goes to legislation level. For example, the Critical Raw Materials Act very clearly states that we need to decrease that dependency. So it really is about, in addition to securing that, okay, you run your operations efficiently, securing the very foundation of your business. And it also relates to risk management. So, companies have their risk matrix. I talk about the funnel, which doesn't exist, only in our heads. So is that really highlighted as a risk, that there might be a risk in terms of our raw materials availability? Because it's a real risk, but is it highlighted in our material, in our risk matrix? And of course, then last but not least, if we think about the direction that the EU has decided to take, it really clearly wants businesses to transition to circularity. And there's a plethora of legislation, some of it already in place, some of it forthcoming. And when companies do their foresight work, I think that it's very important, element of that foresight work, that, okay, how does the market change? And it changes towards circularity. And that legislation list, what I always say to my clients is that it shouldn't be seen as a compliance list, but it should be seen as a strategic list of topics that the company needs to address.
So basically, it's not just indeed compliance that you have to adhere to, but it actually provides you opportunities. Is that basically rephrasing what you just said?
Yes, absolutely. It provides marvelous opportunities, and the sooner the companies address and start exploring these opportunities, obviously, the better off they are at the marketplace, rather than waiting that, okay, we will need to comply in a few years' time. So seeing circularity as a motor for innovation is extremely important.
And you also see this as the great moment, because before we had all these global supply chains and we saw all the benefits of it. Now, because of geopolitical politics, etc., everything changing, together with indeed policies being changed, and also, for instance, thinking about the digital product passport. Is this the great opportunity actually for Europe to grasp it?
This is a perfect opportunity. And now that you mentioned digital product passport, it requires changes. So I'm not going into details of it. We can talk about it next time, but data becomes an inherent part of the product in the future. And this applies to every company who wants to sell their products in the EU market area, not just European companies.
I have a question from one of our viewers. If you had to summarize that, because we published our webinar under the title "The Gap Between Ambition and the Checkout Line," and one of the question was, is, what can be done to revert this? If with everything that you have said so far, Anne, what would you highlight to do, the one or two things?
Good. So first of all, circularity should be seen as a strategic topic at the company. And then coming together, so different, and that's the way I run those circular design programs. So it's not siloed. Circularity shouldn't be siloed inside the company. But hey, let's gather around the same table, design R&D professionals, marketing professional, customer interface people, and obviously the management team needs to be involved, and also finance director. And start from asking ourselves the question that, do we really know who our customers are, what their needs are? Mm-hmm. And then only after that, or in parallel with that question, starting with that, okay, how do we want to develop our operations and our product service offering in a circular way? So doing that work in a parallel, and maybe a good summary would be the circular design framework of my book, because it's very simple, a triangle, and it has three corners. So one is business, one is product, and one is service, and service refers to customer experience. So the company should be able to list benefits in each corner of their circular offering. And if the service corner remains empty, then it really is useful to ask yourself that, okay, do we know anything, or do we know sufficiently about our customers' needs?
Beautiful ending. I mean, beautiful. Bob, do you want to end our webinar?
Yeah. Anna, thank you for sharing your insights and experience so openly today. Yes. And also, I advise everybody to start reading your book. First, it was only available in Finland, now all over the world, so please buy it. So this has been a rich conversation on what circularity really requires in practice, not just in vision, but also in customer experience, product design, as well as business logic, as you said. And I want to thank everybody who joined us and contributed with the questions. And we hope this discussion has given you a sharp view of what it takes actually to move from circular ambition to circular execution. So thank you, and
thank you so much. See you soon. Thank you.